Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce and in support of our Mental Wellbeing Charter, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Welcome audience and panelists to Baton of Hope, Suicide Awareness and Prevention. I'll be honest with you, I find this topic rather challenging. I tend to do the ostrich maneuver with it. I either find it a little bit overwhelming and I don't really want to deal with it, or with my personal battle with depression, it's a topic that I try and steer clear of anyway. But I know it needs addressing, and I know that I need to learn about it, and that's why we, the Chamber, have gathered together some wonderful people to join with me on this webinar today. We've got a wonderful speaker who Stuart will introduce very shortly. Particular mention to Berkshire Healthcare and NHS Foundation Trust, who have got quite a few in our audience, and also shout out to Owen Mumford and Thames Water, PwC. Lovely to have you with us, and all the rest of you who are joining us either in a personal or professional capacity who have an interest in this topic. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chair, Stuart Carroll. Stuart is a senior health economist, epidemiologist and health policy expert specialising in the NHS and public health. He recently worked for 18 months as a senior expert policy and strategy advisor at the heart of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Prime Minister's Vaccines Task Force. As someone who lives with and suffers from severe clinical depression, Stuart is a passionate mental health advocate and campaigner, both a mental health and suicide prevention first aider, and Stuart, may I say, also a gifted songwriter and musician. Without further ado, I shall hand you over to our chair, Stuart Carroll.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you as always for those extremely kind and generous words for which I'm very grateful. And I'd like to say a very good morning to everyone who is joining us today. This is a really important topic. It's a critical subject, and as David framed it, I think so well, it's sometimes a topic, a subject which for understandable reasons people may feel is a challenging and difficult topic to talk about. But as we have sought to do with the Mental Health Charter, with the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, we've sought to, as we phrased it in previous webinars, ensure that those elephants that are in the room, we take them out the room and we discuss openly, compassionately, sensitively, but honestly, some of the big issues relating to mental health. And there's no doubt about it that that S word, suicide, is a big elephant in the societal room, and one we need to face up to and deal with. With that in mind, what we have done today, I'm really pleased to say we've got Lisa Lloyd with us, who's going to come on camera. We appreciate that this subject matter can trigger emotions, it can trigger feelings, and it can be a difficult subject to deal with. Lisa, I know personally because I've been working with Lisa on a number of different topics and subjects as part of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, as a chartered psychologist and psychotherapist, and specialises in mental health in this area. So if anyone is struggling or is being triggered or is having feelings, which is perfectly normal, perfectly understandable, we all do, and many of us who are speaking and presenting today will be feeling exactly that way. Please do feel free to reach out to Lisa on the chat or after the call. We are very keen to ensure that we don't leave any emotions behind, and that people feel comfortable to talk about how they're feeling and their experiences. So thank you very much, Lisa, for joining us today and providing that critical support. I want to move on to introduce our guest speaker today, Mike McCarthy, who is a true force of nature. I've had the privilege and the honour to be working with Mike over the last couple of months as part of the Baton of Hope initiative, which Mike will present to you in a few moments. I'm lucky enough to be on the organising committee with Mike and a fantastic team of people who are dedicated and determined to ensure that suicide is talked about, that it's addressed, it's dealt with, and we are seeking a change initiative and a campaign to, across the United Kingdom, see suicides actually go to zero. And for that to happen, there are a number of conversations, a number of issues, a number of policies, a number of things that government, but also organisations, communities, people need to do for that to happen. But overwhelmingly, we have a message of hope. We have a message that actually this isn't one of those areas which is somehow hopeless or helpless, despite the fact that, yes, people understandably can feel that way. And I think all of us actually at one or time in our life or another have probably felt that way, even if it's just been fleeting and transient. But there is always a way forward. But there's only a way forward if people know there's a way forward and they know how to access services, how to access help. Those of you who have heard me speak before will have heard me use the phrase, "Together we win." And I think that is a critical component and consideration when we think about anything mental health and particularly suicide. It is absolutely vital that we all think about what role we can play within our own friendship circles, within our professional circles, within our social circles. And that's one of the things we want to do with this fantastic initiative. We are going to have some Q&A after Mike has presented, so please do feel free to come forward with your questions. There are no silly questions on this issue. Please feel free to ask exactly what you're thinking and you're feeling. I can assure you that if you're thinking and feeling, oh, I'm not sure I want to say that, virtually everybody else is thinking and saying exactly that. So please do tell us, because we can only make the changes that we want to make if we understand the insights of everyone, because this is a very personal and individualized issue. So look forward to your questions, but I'm going to hand over to the main man, Mike McCarthy, to take you through the Baton of Hope and this fantastic initiative. Over to you, Mike.
First of all, thank you, Stuart, and thanks to Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce for the invitation. Stuart said that he was lucky enough to be involved on the Baton of Hope organising committee, and Stuart, right back at you. I think we're lucky to have you on the organising committee, and I think that phrase, "Together we win," stands at the core of what we're trying to represent through Baton of Hope. So I'm really grateful for the invitation this morning. But I shouldn't be here. I'm going to share my screen with you now and explain exactly why it is that I think I shouldn't be here. If you just bear with me 1 second. That's right. Okay, hopefully you can all see that author Ross, a lesson in loss and hope. I shouldn't be here because this is not the world that I imagine for myself in retirement. I shouldn't be meeting you people, and you know, that's the way I feel about virtually everybody that I meet nowadays through Baton of Hope. We have a saying in the community that I'm now part of, and that is, I wish I'd never met you, but I'm glad that I did. So, you know, despite what I'm saying there, I'm glad that I've met you at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. To explain why I don't feel that this is my world, I need to go back to the 20th of February last year. And I sometimes wonder, looking back, did I count my blessings? Was I thankful as I closed my eyes and went to sleep for the great good fortune that I'd had in my life? My wonderful, wonderful family, you know, that mean so much to me. Did I pass a thought about that as I went to sleep? In all honesty, the answer was probably no. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I didn't treasure my life. It's just that looking back, I probably didn't treasure it enough. At this stage, I was looking back on what I thought was a decent career. I had been a news reporter for the BBC and for Sky News for 40 years. And for me, it was the ticket of a lifetime. It's something that I'd wanted to do since seeing man land on the moon in the 1960s. While all the other boys were talking about wanting to be an astronaut, I wanted to be that guy who was telling the story, who was telling the world about the astronauts and what they were doing. And luckily for me, that naive thought stayed with me. You know, from the early days, top right of the screen with black hair and a mullet. I interviewed the legendary world boxing champion, Muhammad Ali, to the thousands of hours I spent in front of a camera reporting live from wars, floods, terrorist atrocities, riots, you name it, to the interviews with prime ministers and so many inspiring so-called ordinary people, some of whom I remain friends with to this day. There were tough times, of course, and tough days in a job like that. You can't avoid it. Days such as this, the 15th of April, 1989 at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. It was almost 2 weeks after my son Ross had been born, and I was on paternity leave at the time, when the phone went and my then BBC news editor asked me to go to the stadium, as I was the one who just happened to live closest. Parts of it I don't remember, that's me circled. Parts of it I remember too well. As you know, it was the worst footballing disaster this country has ever witnessed, and 97 football supporters ultimately were crushed to death, who died as a result of the events on that day. It was a beautiful spring day. 95 people who had gone to watch a football match never went home. The others died later of their injuries. And this is just one story. I was sort of relatively green at the time, and people sometimes say, you know, how do you approach such horror as a journalist? And I do remember the sense of detachment, not from the events that were unfolding around me, but a detachment from myself, if that makes sense. Earlier, minutes earlier, I'd been at home in my jeans mowing the lawn, and the next thing I was desperately trying to concentrate on my job, and you know, with a deeply traumatic and tragic reality staring me in the face. And I remember having a conversation with myself. I can remember clearly at first feeling sorry for myself at the overwhelming task that appeared to be facing me. I'd never covered a story of this magnitude before, of global significance. But then I quickly gave myself a talking to and said, you know, how could you feel bad about your own predicament when there were people clearly dead or dying just feet away? I knew the magnitude of this man-made catastrophe was huge, but what I never expected was to be covering the same story 30 years later. Because of the inquests, and there were more than one, the court cases, the inquiries, it's a story that kind of stayed with me in more ways than one. I met some incredible people, some of the families who lost loved ones on that day, and I'm proud to call them my friends to this day. People who, against all the odds, despite everything that was thrown at them, the criticism, they stuck with it. And, you know, they were dedicated to the cause, they were dedicated to the people that they had lost. So going back to that day that I mentioned, the 20th of February, 2021, it turned into the 21st, and at 3:30 in the morning, the phone went. And it was my son's fiancée, Charlotte, saying that she found Ross in the hallway of their house and that he wasn't in a good way. She said that the ambulance were there, they were trying to resuscitate him, and that she'd call back as soon as she had more information. And the reason that I've sort of referred to my career just there is I thought that I was strong. I thought that I was resilient. I thought that life and my career had sort of shown me the worst and that nothing else could hurt me. But that call at 3:30 in the morning, when does any good news come through at 3:30 in the morning? That phone call proved that nothing could prepare you for what was about to happen. 5 minutes later, the phone went again, and Charlotte said that my son, who was 31, had died. He was a beautiful, beautiful man who was caring and kind, a great family man, great work ethic. But anyway, we drove, my wife and I drove to his house a few hours away, and we were numb and, you know, obviously trauma. I'm going to play a short video, if I may, and I hope this works. A few months after we lost Ross, I was approached by CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, to ask if I'd been involved in a campaign called STAY, a suicide prevention campaign, in which people were encouraged to, I guess, to see hope. And this really, I think they did a good job, and this really captures, perhaps as much as anything, how I felt.
No matter how old your sons and daughters are, they're still your children. Even though Ross was 31, he's just my kid, you know. He was a dedicated family man, quite gregarious and could be cheeky, and it just really made us laugh. It was so funny. He was just a good man. You know, you wouldn't pick him out as the kind of person who you would expect to be in such a dark place that they would end up taking their own lives. But even I, as a father, didn't realise how close he was to the end. They had a very, very special relationship, and in his farewell letter, he wrote extensively to Charlie, basically to say goodbye and to encourage him to be brave. Ross believed very strongly in the power of proper support and therapy, so he asked his family to campaign for better mental health provision. One of the things about suicide is that there is still a huge amount of stigma surrounding the subject. I believe that if I and other people can talk openly, maybe we can do our little bit to try and get rid of that stigma. That vulnerability isn't weakness. If only we could change that attitude, we could save people like Ross. We could help them to stay with us. This is Ross's tree. It's been in our garden for 31 years, and every time I come down, I sort of basically stroke the leaves, think about him. You know, it's a poor substitute, but it's a way of him sort of being with us, you know. We as a family have never been through anything this hard, but we still believe that there is hope for people. Help is there. And anybody else who may find themselves in that situation, you know, reach out to the people who want you to stay, because you'll find that there are far more of them than you believe.
I mentioned in that film Ross's farewell letter, and what he said. He wrote to each one of us in turn, and he said, "Dad, please fight for mental health. The support is just not there." And what he meant by that is that he'd suffered from severe depression for 10 years and was a warrior. He fought, he tried everything to reach salvation. And after that 10 years, he finally went to the NHS and asked for therapy and was put on a 6-month waiting list. And he died 2 weeks into the wait. When I eventually got back on my feet, I decided that I would do everything that I could to honour Ross's memory and to attend to his dying wish, if you like, please fight for mental health. And I'm proud that, you know, despite the fact that he knew that the end had come for him, that he could see a cause worth championing in a life that he wouldn't be part of. And if anybody tells me that suicide is a selfish act, I would certainly sort of challenge that. What I found, I did research, I spoke to clinicians, I spoke to politicians, to charities, to bereaved mums, dads, brothers, sisters, you name it. I spoke to them and tried to understand as much as I could. And what I found, sadly, that, you know, those words, the support is just not there, in one sense was true as far as Ross was concerned, because at the moment of crisis, you know, it wasn't there. And you go to hospital with a broken finger, and okay, you may have to wait for a few hours, maybe even several hours, but you'll get seen. You go to hospital with a broken mind, with what I call cancer of the mind. And is it right in 21st century society that we turn people away who are presenting as being suicidal? And many of you will already know this figure. The biggest killer of adults under 35 in the UK is suicide, both men and women. And when I discovered that, I felt a few things. I felt guilty that as a journalist that I hadn't really come across this. And, you know, I feel entirely responsible for that. But I also felt, hang on, it's not COVID, it's not cancer, it's not drugs, it's not road accidents. So where are the conversations? Where's the political debate? Where's the public discourse? Where are the lessons in the classroom? Where are the lectures in the universities? Why are we so silent about this when it's robbing us of so much promise and potential? It's almost like there's an invisible gas out there and people are falling to the ground and we're stepping over them. You know, and I think such as the stigma around suicide, the figures have stagnated for 20 years. They rise a bit, they fall a bit, but they've stagnated for 20 years. And as the slide says there, 3/4 of those who take their own lives are male. And I want to just address that for a little while, but lest you think that, you know, this is a male-only subject, more women attempt to take their lives than men. I think with men in particular, I think, you know, we've got a lot to learn. I think we've got to take responsibility in the sense that we understand that vulnerability is not weakness. You know, we've got to change the language. What does man up mean? It means suppress it, take it on the chin, don't talk about it. Who put those words, strong, silent, type, together? What does it mean? Strong and silent? Why should they be, you know, complementary things? And I think of Tyson Fury, and Stuart and I have had a conversation about this, but I think of him, you know, physically, he's proven himself to be one of the strongest men on the planet, you know, world heavyweight boxing champion. And yet he's wise enough to see and he has the emotional intelligence to explain the problems that he's had with mental health. Does make him vulnerable, but it doesn't necessarily make him weak. The language around suicide, again, forgive me, a lot of you will already appreciate this, but the illegal status was lifted in 1961, and here we are, more than 60 years later, still using the language of the Dark Ages. Ross wasn't perfect, but he didn't commit a crime. I don't believe he committed a sin either. I don't think he was right in what he did. I think there were answers. I think he could have been saved under different circumstances, but I don't think he committed a crime. Everybody you talk to now, you know, the most senior clinicians, the, you know, politicians in the NHS and elsewhere, agree suicide is preventable. So our question from Baton of Hope is, why aren't we preventing them? If it's preventable, what we've been doing for the past 20 years hasn't worked, let's face it. Yeah, of course, lives have been saved. Great work has been done by so many good charities. So I got talking to another father who whose son Jordan took his life, Steve Phillip, who's a good friend of mine and a co-founder of Baton of Hope, and we talked about, you know, what we could all do, what anybody could do, and we came up with the realization that a lot of people say suicide is so complex that there is no common denominator, there's no thread that links them all. I don't agree with that. I think there is a common thread, and that common thread is a loss of hope. So we asked ourselves, how can we try to restore hope? And one of the ideas was to, you know, march to Parliament and carry banners and all of that kind of thing. But then, and we can't remember between us who was the first person to coin the phrase baton of hope. But we thought that if we could create a physical symbol, that might rally people, it might galvanize communities into looking at suicide in a different way. First of all, talking about it, recognizing the extent of the problem that we have, and in so doing, smashing the stigma. If you smash the stigma, people will talk. If people talk, they'll seek help. If they seek help, then, you know, they stand a lot more chance of surviving. So, you know, hope is obviously at the core of what we're trying to achieve, but there are lots of other things as well. You know, the sense of universality that we've all got a role to play. We've all got some responsibility, whether you're at the highest levels of government formulating suicide prevention strategy, or you're just sending another text to your mate or an extra text to your mate saying, how are you really? Or a hand on the shoulder. So what we're trying to do as well is to bring people together, to unify, as Stuart so rightly says, together we win. And what we plan to do with the baton is to take it around the UK in summer of next year, starting on the 25th in Glasgow and going to all the capitals, Cardiff, Belfast, Edinburgh and London, as well as lots of other cities around the UK, and spreading the word. But our focus is on practical change, on real change, on trying to encourage people to turn that prism slightly and look at life in a different way. I talked last night to business people and they were saying, yeah, but how do we measure it? You know, how do we do this? How do we do that? And I think just by making some small changes in some cases, we can make a difference. Again, if we change the outlook, if we refer to people who are self-harming as attention seeking rather than attention needing, you know, that kind of thing. If someone is so desperate, imagine they're so desperate that they self-harm to attract attention, that's attention needing. And I think it's little areas like that that we can all change. We can ask, you know, people were saying last night, you know, oh, but there are no barometers, there's no measure of mood. Well, you know, again, just simple things. How are you out of 10 and why? You know, it's a start. It's a start. If we put more money into research for mental health, if we focus more attention on suicide prevention, if we talk about it more, then we can all make a difference. So hence Baton of Hope was born, and I'm going to fast forward slightly now because I'm very conscious of time. But a company came along called Thomas Light, who are goldsmiths and silversmiths to the royal family, and basically asked us if they could make the Baton of Hope. And I tried to play it cool, but you know, within a millisecond said, "Oh yes, please." So they are now making the Baton of Hope, and And this is it. This is a preview, because that full design isn't being officially revealed until tomorrow. I've been told not to share it with anybody, but I can't help myself. I'm so excited about it, and there it is. And as Stuart was saying earlier, we're aiming for a zero suicide society. If those figures have stagnated for 20 years, then we have to take a wholly different approach, a much more energetic approach, because there is hope. Suicide is preventable. And I think if we don't set a target of zero, then we're not going to get anywhere near it. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. You know, this is a story of hope. Somebody said to me from the Baton of Hope organising committee the other day, you know, I kind of feel guilty about finding pleasure in working for Baton of Hope. And my response was, no, of course we've got to find pleasure in working for Baton of Hope. We've got to find optimism, because sure, you know, we're talking about death and despair, but we're also, more importantly, talking about life and hope. And if we can't celebrate life and hope, then, you know, what are we as human beings? Thank you so much. And if there are any questions at all, please feel free to ask.
Thank you ever so much, Mike. I think the saying that a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way, you've just exemplified there, and that was a very powerful presentation. And I'm really grateful to you for being so open, so candid, and so transparent about your experience. I know we've talked about this many times before, but it's not easy talking in those terms, but you've done that. And I was actually thinking about you the other day, and I know you're very modest and you're very self-effacing, but it is heroic what you're doing and the message that you're sending to so many people. And I actually was looking at a quote to define a hero, and I picked up this quote, which is, "A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles." And interesting enough, that comes from Christopher Reeve, who of course played Superman. So even Superman would say that heroism is born out of having the persistence, the determination, and the commitment to make a difference. And before I just look at some of the questions that are coming in, I just want to amplify, I think, some of the points you were making as way of reflection. Some of the comments you made there, I think, are so important, so powerful. You used the phrase in the video, but there are far more than you would happen to believe. And I think it's so important all of us take that sentiment away, that this could affect any one of us at any time. And that's why we have to treat this like a team sport. Awareness, being there for someone, spotting the signs, spotting the signals, and having that openness is absolutely critical. Two other things I want to mention: vulnerability, absolutely spot on. We as men particularly are often very bad at this. Let's just be frank about that. And we need to, again, get that elephant out the room. You use some great examples there. Tyson Fury, heavyweight champion of the world. Here's a few others for you. You know, Andrew Flintoff, Steve Harmison, the cricketers, could bowl a ball at 95 miles an hour. I think that's strength. Frank Bruno, as someone's just put in the chat, absolutely. Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, you know, if you look at him, wow, you know, what a specimen of a man. He suffered from depression. Michael Phelps, the awesome swimmer. Buzz Aldrin even suffered with depression. He went to the moon and back, but he still had depression. And Bruce Springsteen, the boss. So if the boss is saying it's okay to talk about this, let's do it, I think we really do need to get on that bus and talk about it. And the final thing I want to say before we're going to go to some of the questions, and there's lots in the chat, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm really grateful to everyone who's putting comments in. You're absolutely spot on. This is a cancer of the mind, as you put it. And when you think about it in society, that word cancer is one that brings about a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis, and rightly so. But this is an area that also demands and deserves its attention on the same level playing field. And there is a need for all of us to keep pushing and campaigning government, politicians, policymakers, to understand that this is exactly that. It's a cancer of the mind. It can be prevented, it can be cured, but we have to look in those terms. And the one thing I just want to close on, the thing that has become my kind of lodestar that guides my ship as we go through the Baton of Hope journey, is that sentiment that Ross articulated, which is please fight for mental health. I've discussed this with Mike before. That is a rallying call as far as I'm concerned. I know other organising committee members feel the same, and I would like to think everybody on this webinar would share that sentiment. So please, you know, when you're thinking about this issue, perhaps just think of that phrase and think about all the good that we could do as we move forward to drive down to zero suicides and to ensure that that message of hope can really shine through. Thank you ever so much, Mike. Let's get into some of the questions. I'm just going to sort of navigate the chat. What I should say is, I mean, you've got a lot of fans here, Mike. That's the first thing to say. There's a lot of positive sentiments. I'm just having a kind of scroll up. I mean, one of the kind of themes of the questions, which I think is coming over to kind of pick out something a lot of people are picking up on their comments, is what do you think, Mike, needs to be done almost from a campaign point of view, and in terms of communication, to get government and politicians to put this much higher up the agenda?
I think, first of all, just listen, recognise, you know, the magnitude of this issue, and there's something that, you know, excuse me, in the suicide prevention community called parity of esteem, and basically what that means is that, you know, there should be the same amount of research on mental health as there is on physical health. There should be the same amount of I've said this earlier, same amount of attention. You know, it's interesting, whenever the health statistics come out, the latest NHS waiting list and that kind of thing, it's every time it strikes me that, you know, you hear about hip replacements or knee surgery, all important things, you know, of course they are, but very rarely do you hear about the waiting lists for mental health treatment. And again, there are so many examples that I could cite where, you know, there is nowhere near parity between mental health and physical health in so many areas. And I think it's not just for politicians, it's for everybody. It's for education, it's for the media. You know, there was a headline the other day, a Conservative MP who took time off. It took a few weeks off because he was suffering with depression. And the headline was, MP admits to taking time off through depression. You know, admits? Would you admit to having a sore throat? Excuse me. I've got one off at the moment. Would you admit to having an ear infection? You know, why should we think of it as having to admit? As many people have told me, depression is the common cold of mental health. It's so common. And yet here we are still, you know, if I was still working for Sky News, would I pick up the phone to the news editor and say, sorry, I'm depressed today, I'm feeling too anxious? In all honesty, I think I would say, I've got a sore throat. I think I'd lie. And why are we in this position? Why can we still not accept that it's, you know, perfectly human to feel like this? And, you know, it's just in some ways an illness like any other. Long answer, sorry, Stuart.
No, it's an excellent answer, and I think you're absolutely spot on there, Mike. Actually, that there is that issue, I think, particularly in the workplace, around just sometimes saying, but I'm not feeling well, I'm not feeling okay for mental health reasons. And even myself with my condition, I sometimes still even struggle with that. I actually just force myself now into just saying it as it is, because I feel that kind of leadership responsibility to do it. But you're right, we need to move that on, but it just becomes a natural mindset. So if you had, you know, a sore toe or a sore throat, you just say it. And we need to definitely work on that, and I think that's an area of focus we should all share. Got a question from Fiona. Very good question. She's asking, what are we doing wrong as a society that this is happening, and what country do you think is maybe mentally wealthy so we can learn from them?
I know that in some countries in Scandinavia, they are trying a different approach. And in Sweden, for example, which we normally associate with a high suicide rate, they've made a big change and their statistics are now coming down. And there is evidence out there that a zero suicide approach does work. I mean, there was quite a well-known example in Detroit in the United States not so many years ago, where people who presented to hospitals and GP clinics and the like, whether it was, again, a sore throat or a bad chest or whatever, were routinely asked about their mental health while they were there. And that certainly worked in Detroit. So I think, we've got to take steps to overcome this sort of fear and stigma around mental health so that people are open to the idea. We've got to be transparent is basically what I'm trying to say. I think suicide still lurks in a dark little corner, and I liken it to where child abuse was 20 years ago. Again, that was in the same dark corner, and the default advice to children was don't mention it, suppress it, bottle it up. That was the way that society thought we should treat child abuse. Fortunately, we live in more enlightened times. We've opened up the subject, we talk about it, we're transparent about it, and children now know that they have a place to go, that there is hope and there's help out there, and by and large they know what to do. I think suicide is still in that dark corner, and I think we need to shine a spotlight on it, bring it out into the open, and try and encourage transparency as much as possible. That's the first step.
Yeah, no, agree. Sunlight, brightness, hope. I think that's a really, really good way to think about this. Libby asks dates of the next of the tour next summer. She would like to know the exact plan when we're going to take this Baton around the country.
Yeah, well, starting on June the 25th in Glasgow, which is where we will launch. There are sort of, particularly bad problems there in relation to suicide. So we're starting in Glasgow. We're going around the 4 capitals, as I say, and I can send a precise dates on. I think it's 11 or 12 cities. I can't remember off the top of my head. We've only just sort of agreed this as an organising committee, but I can certainly let you have the precise details. And on the final day, we're in London. We're inviting people who've been bereaved by suicide, families, friends, work colleagues, to come and join us and to carry that baton to Parliament from Trafalgar Square. And anybody else who wants to join us on that march is more than welcome. And what was I going to say? That yes, that's on the final day, and we've got support from big charities and small charities around the country. Samaritan's Calm, that you saw the film from there. We've also got volunteers from around the country who've registered on our website, www.batonofhopeuk.org, to get the plug-in again. People who've actively said that they want to be part of this movement, part of this mission. So we're expecting that sort of final day in particular to be, a huge event.
Excellent. Here's another organising committee member, my cat Winston. He's a regular attendee on this vital issue, but absolutely plug once again, go to the website, please get in touch, please support this. This is for everyone to get involved in, so do get in contact with us. Joanna asks, this is a really, really good question. It's got a bit of a preface, which I just want to read out, but it's a really, really good question. So she's saying she works in the homelessness sector, and in her opinion, which I would agree with, there are too many deaths by suicide. We often have to manage the difficulty in safeguarding people who have capacity as an adult. what advice would you give to minimise the risk of death by suicide for someone living in supported accommodation? That she's saying they do regular welfare checks to ensure no harmful objects in the room, ensure no one's stockpiling medication. But I think just seeking some general view from yourself about that particularly vulnerable cohort of people.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I wanted, apart from getting involved with Baton of Hope, to do something a bit more hands-on in the city where I live, which is Sheffield. So I volunteered to work for a national charity called Talk Club, which is a talking group for men, which we opened at the Sheffield United Stadium at Bramall Lane last September, and earlier this year at Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday. And what I've sort of learned is, although we call it Talk Club, it's basically listening club. And, I think people are crying out to be validated, just to be heard. And I think that's the first step. And I know it's a very general thing to say, but I think many of us have maybe sort of lost the ability to listen. I know that, since we lost Ross, I've learned to listen to people in a better way than I did before, and I say that as a former journalist who, was genuinely interested in the stories of other people. So yeah, we talk to many vulnerable individuals who come to Talk Club. Incidentally, the football model is working really well with men, because you put mental health over a door, and a lot of men won't walk through that door. You put football with a little bit of mental health thrown in over the door, and it's amazing how men will sort of come through that door. And it's quite funny in a way, because when we have conversations, we all agree that mental health is more important even than football. Yet the amount of men who Sheffield United supporters who won't go through the doors at Sheffield Wednesday, and vice versa. So we didn't have any option but to open 2 clubs at each one of the grounds. So that's the first thing I say. And I've seen this work, over the past year. Without going into too much detail, I'll just sort of cite the example of one person who is 22 years old, who walked into Talk Club because his dad made him, basically, and he sat there with his hoodie up and his sort of nose buried in his sweatshirt, and didn't want to say anything. And to see the improvements over a year is phenomenal, and it just gives me hope and lifts my heart to see that we can do things, we can make a difference to people who are suicidal, who are carrying huge burdens like PTSD or whatever. And sorry, just one more thought that occurs to me. On the 11th of November, we will rightly remember the people that we have lost in war, but we won't necessarily remember those who we've lost to suicide. And suicide kills far more soldiers, far more servicemen and women than armed conflict does, and combat. And again, I think, it's what I say about sort of just changing the prism slightly, so that we recognise these very, very important statistics that are screaming at us and staring us in the face. Sorry, another long answer. I was paid to talk for a living, and I do it too much sometimes. Sorry.
You talk brilliantly, Mike, and I think actually the point I just want to pick out there is, I think you keep using this word listening, which I think is so important. I was actually reading this book on the biochemistry of the brain, and actually the brain is designed to listen 70% of the time, talk 30% of the time. We're probably all guilty of inverting that percentage, and it's just a reminder that actually listening goes a long way, and listening's free. You don't really need to do anything, you just need to sit, listen, and be there for someone. So I think it's a really good point. Damien's got a question, just asking, very keen to be involved and would love to know when nominations will open to carry the baton. I think you sort of touched on this before, but it'd be useful just to clarify that.
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't sort of thought specifically about who's going to carry it where. We have received a few requests from families who say that they want to be involved in the event that we're putting on in each of the individual cities, and we'll certainly, you know, we want to honour people who've been bereaved by suicide, and you know, we will think about that over the coming months. But again, you know, I'd repeat that this is for everybody. We all have a role to play, and we all have a responsibility. So we're trying to bring people together from, you know, all kinds of experiences and all walks of life.
And absolutely, if you've got ideas, get in touch with us, or you know people who might want to carry the baton or be involved, reach out to us. Very interested. Matthew says there's a lack of understanding even at the GP level, and that's frightening. There's a lot of passing the buck. That's how I felt many times. Why is the level of understanding so poor at that primary care GP level?
I'm no expert, but you know, I've heard many times that GPs, they spend a small proportion of their time during training on mental health, certainly again compared with physical health. I think the demands on GPs are very heavy, particularly in some areas. Again, one of the things that I would sort of encourage people to do as much as possible, again, it's about sort of turning this prism a little bit, is to try to shed the kind of punitive approach that we use. Ross worked away from home a lot at very short notice, and couldn't make appointments, and sometimes forgot to tell them that he was working away because it was at short notice, and the man was struggling profoundly with depression. You know, and people who've suffered depression know that sometimes it's difficult even to get out of bed in the morning, you know, let alone travel away to work, you know, to do the best that he could for his family and his employers. But he was summarily discharged from by the GP for not turning up. And again, you know, it's important, obviously, for people not to abuse the system, but I think we have to make a rational and compassionate assessment of why people may miss appointments for treatment for things like depression. So yeah, you know, part of it I don't understand. Again, this is so rife, it's so common, it's so, you know, staring us in the face that sometimes it puzzles me. And, you know, I guess it would be good to ask GPs directly why this is the case sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's very much agree. And there's a sort of link question here. Someone's just written they feel massively grateful that their son was saved after attempting suicide, and was really pleased to see that this was taken seriously, and now he's getting ongoing help. Do you think that help is dependent on where you live? So effectively a kind of postcode lottery question here.
It is, and in some places the waiting lists are higher than 6 months, and it does depend on where you live. And I think, you know, certainly the attitudes of, it's not just the medical profession and the NHS, it's all agencies who deal with people who are suicidal, or deal with the family who are bereaved as a result of suicide. Ross wrote this long letter, it was 12 pages long, and the police took it away, and by the time we got to Ross's house, his body had gone and the letter had gone. And at a time when, you know, there were sort of circular conversations going around in our minds about the whys and what ifs and, you know, all of that kind of thing, the one thing that could have given us some kind of comfort and some answers was held by the police. And again, I understand that it was a sudden death, and police have a responsibility to investigate the possibility of, you know, a criminal element. But we had to basically plead for a week before we got the letter, and it just felt very wrong, because if I owned anything in this world, it was that letter. That was my son's voice. And we're not angry. The police didn't, the officer who dealt with the family was very compassionate and kind, and it was the system. The system is glacial. My friend who I mentioned earlier, Steve Phillip, co-founder of the Baton of Hope, he was sort of working away from home when he got the call that his son Jordan had taken his life, and by the time he returned to Harrogate, where he lives, nobody was able to tell him where the body was, and he had to go around hospitals and funeral directors to try and find out where his son's body was. And again, it's not, that people are unkind. Again, I think the system is just not fit for purpose in the 21st century. How can that be allowed to happen? How can we, be adding to the pain that someone like Steve would have been feeling at that moment? So I think it's the system that's glacial. We were told we couldn't have the letter because the police computers weren't speaking to the coroner's office computers, and it did sort of feel like we'd gone back in time. So again, it's lots and lots of things out there that we need to look at, and with a little bit of effort in some respects, we can really make big changes.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point, and an important point. I've actually been speaking to my local police and crime commissioner about this, and I would encourage people to do that, because I think people are very open-minded, to trying to make that system more compassionate and more efficient. But for all the reasons you've articulated there, that is an imperative and key. Fiona's got this is right in your league, Mike. So what can, should, will media do to lead the change and change the language?
I think that's it. You've almost answered your own question there, that it is largely the language that they use. And it's easy to think that the world's gone PC man and all of the rest of it, but I know now, as a bereaved dad, how it feels when somebody uses the phrase commit suicide. And again, I understand it's how we've been sort of brought up. It's what the phrase that we've been brought up to say, committed suicide. But every time I hear it, I kind of, there's an inner wince. And I'm not judgmental, because I'll have used the same phrase many times in my life, I'm sure, and it's only since losing Ross that I appreciate how important that is. There are quite clear guidelines about how you cover suicide, the whole subject of suicide in the media, the BBC. I'm just looking to see if I've got it in my study, but I can't see it at the moment. But the BBC editorial guidelines have got a big section about reporting on suicide. One thing that I think is a bit of a myth out there is talking about suicide encourages it. That is a myth that has been roundly discounted and dismissed. And the advice now, for moving away from the media a little bit here, apologies, but the advice is, if you feel that somebody is suicidal and you've got reason to believe that they may be, that the best approach is to ask them directly, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Do you have the means to carry out that plan? And again, that's very difficult for some people to comprehend. Again, a lot of the business people that I was speaking to last night sort of, had a sharp intake of breath when I said that. But again, this is, the latest advice, and I can see the reason for it.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I would encourage people also to go to the Jordan Legacy website of our friend Steve. There's some really good advice there that you can pick out as well. Due to the foresight of Mr. David Sabb, we are going to keep going for another 15 minutes. We're going to go into extra time and penalties because it's such an important subject. So I'm going to take as many of the questions as I possibly can. Just per Lisa's note in the chat, we will follow up with any written answers if you would like to write to us. That's not a problem. So please do reach out. Another question from Damien. Many people have seen the amazing work that the Free Dads Walking did and their Pride of Britain award. how can we make sure that the amazing work of the Baton of Hope does not get isolated or put in a silo in relation to the other great campaigns on suicide prevention?
Yes, again, a really good question. And we've spoken to the three dads at our last sort of face-to-face organising committee meeting. We joined up with them on Zoom, and you know, fantastic guys they are, all three of them, and you know, they're blazing a trail. They really are, and I take my hat off to them. And I think, you know, they would like to be part of Baton of Hope. We'd be delighted and proud to have them as part of Baton of Hope. They'll certainly be there on the London section of the tour next year. And again, I've spoken to them about this, Andy, Tim and Mike, about how we need to create unity, because in the charitable sector very often there is a lot of fragmentation. You know, there are loads of charities around the country doing great work, but we're not as a whole speaking with one voice. And I have to say, to be honest about it, with some campaigns there's an element of vanity involved. This is our project, you know, it's for us alone. I think if we're really going to tackle suicide and suicide prevention, we need to come together, drop the vanity, you know, and again, it goes back to your phrase, Stuart, together we win, and that's, you know, absolutely true.
Excellent. I'm going to combine two questions from Lucy here. Saying, hello, Mike, if you were Health Secretary or Prime Minister and you would get Lucy's vote, what would you change immediately within the NHS? And on political parties, do you think any political party is better or ahead on the focus on mental health than others, and any of them actually including this in their manifestos?
Baton of Hope is non-political. You know, we note very carefully what's happening in the individual parties in relation to their approach to mental health and suicide prevention in particular. I think it's fair to say that we feel a sense of huge disappointment that politics seems to have got in the way of progress just lately. I was lucky enough to have a private chat with the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid. It feels like just a few months ago, it's probably more. And what are we on to now? Is it the sort of second or third Health Secretary since then? So I would say to them, there's a lot of cross-party support for suicide prevention. Of course there is. How could you, you know, argue against suicide prevention? So a lot of unanimity already there. And I sometimes wonder whether the short-termism of politics really does get in the way of progress on important issues that go beyond party differences. And I don't know what the answer is. I'd like to think that one day we could form some kind of mechanism whereby these big subjects that everybody agreed with were carried through. The 10-year plan that was announced on that day by Sajid Javid for suicide prevention, and incidentally, it was the first time I think that he'd spoken publicly about the loss of his own brother to suicide, which we talked about in our chat. That suicide plan has now been parked. And again, I think I'm right in saying, Stuart would probably know better than I do, that there was a bill going through Parliament regarding online safety. That I think now has been parked, and we can't afford to do this, you know, time's pressing. So again, you know, a very long answer, Lucy, but I would say, look, can we all agree that we pretty roundly agree on this subject and form some kind of mechanism to pass it on without interruption, you know? And if I can just add to that, just sort of briefly, there are some wonderful places in the United Kingdom, not many of them, but where people who are suicidal can go for a 4-day period. It's residential, and they stay for a 4-day period with intensive treatment over the period of those 4 days, and apparently they're getting great results. I'm hoping to go and visit one in London in December. There's another one being built in Manchester, and I think something like that, certainly at the crisis end, is important. But we've got to, think about, I think it was Archbishop Desmond Tutu who said that we've got to stop fishing people out of the river and go upstream to find out why they're jumping in. And I think, early prevention, going even to young children with talks in the classroom and that kind of thing is massively important.
Yeah, absolutely right, Mike. I'm going to combine Jean-Marc and Lucy's questions here. They're on the same kind of theme. So what can be done to educate employers to be more open-minded about hiring people who have suffered or indeed are suffering with mental health issues? And when you talk to groups of business leaders, Mike, what is the one thing you ask them to do when they go back to their organisation?
Support the Baton of Hope. The one thing that we haven't touched on is that the Baton of Hope is putting together charters for the workplace and for education. And if I can just talk about the sort of workplace charter, given the question, the charter will effectively be a kite mark, a gold standard of best practice in the workplace. And this will, invite employers to sign a pledge to provide mental health first aiders in every team. We've got lots of physical health first aiders out there already. Why not have mental health first aiders in every team? Whether there's safe, non-judgmental spaces that they can go to within the workplace. Are there regular meetings with your colleagues and line managers regarding mental health, that employers, aren't afraid to confront this and say, that the talk club question, how are you out of 10 and why? It sounds very simple, and it is very simple, but I've seen it work, and I've seen, what that question alone, the power of that question can do. So yeah, for employers, look out for the charters, and and we would like to see as many employers as possible applying for Baton of Hope charter status. And I've been speaking to a lot of people in business, and I'm delighted to say that there's huge interest in the workplace charter, and people sort of queuing up to say that they want to sign up to it, not just as a sort of reassurance to the employees that they've got already, but in this recruitment drought that we have at the moment, to send out the message to potential employees, come to us, we'll look after you physically and mentally.
Yeah, it's so important, the workplace, because people spend so much time there, and people, I think, often feel they have expectations of how they have to be rather than how they should be and just need to be. So I think that's absolutely imperative. Just a quick acknowledgement, Mike, to your answer to the question earlier about GPs. The person's written back saying, yeah, I agree, there probably needs to be some kind of callback service, because people with mental health issues may struggle to get to appointments because of forgetfulness, because of the challenges they're going through. And I think that's certainly something we can continue to look at through the Baton of Hope and promote that message. So thank you for that comment. Just going to try and combine Lucy Matthews' questions here. Really good idea actually from Lucy. Could we advertise on beer mats? If you could get these things into pubs and bars, you reach a bigger audience, particularly maybe an audience that doesn't want to talk about this so easily. And are we looking to get the BBC involved because of your previous journalistic career? And Matthew's just asking, why do the media allow TV such as Love Island to carry on when it clearly has a negative impact on mental health and has led to suicides? Where is the responsibility? I think the question there is there something for Ofcom? Is there some kind of regulatory imperative? It would be interesting to get your thoughts.
Yeah, a few sort of questions in one. Yeah, the beer mats, I think, great idea. I hate to say, but I have heard it mentioned before. But it is a brilliant idea. I think just getting the word out there in whatever way we can. I mean, I've been going around with flyers into GPs, surgeries, and pubs, and gyms, and all the rest of it. And it's interesting, incidentally, if you go into a GP surgery or a clinic, look around at the flyers on the walls. I am prepared to place a bet that you will not find one relating to mental health. And if you do, it will be one. And there will be a sea of flyers on the notice board relating to physical health. And I've had some very interesting conversations with receptionists and the like when I've turned up with my flyers. Yeah, beer mats, great idea. BBC, you mentioned being involved in Baton of Hope. Yes, I can't say too much about that, but the BBC Breakfast in particular has shown massive interest in the project and say they want to adopt us, in inverted commas, in the same way that they adopted the three dads who had a very close relationship with BBC Breakfast. The media and Love Island, it's not an area that I worked in. I worked in news, so I don't know a lot about how reality television works, other than what I occasionally see myself, although I'm not a huge fan necessarily of certainly some of the reality TV shows. I think they've got a lot to learn. Let's be blunt about this. I think the message that they put out about physical appearance, for one, it can be extremely destructive. I think the support that they've given to people in the past who've been thrown off the show or whatever, found themselves in the glare of the media spotlight without any support whatsoever. I think they're learning, and they are now providing greater support for people in those circumstances. But I think personally, and it is a personal opinion, I think there's a lot more that could be and should be done about that.
Yeah, I would totally echo your sentiments there, Mike. Entertainment should be secondary to what's primary, which is people's health and well-being. Just going to close with two questions. Going to take one now and then finish with one final one, because we're nearly on time. Tracy asks, how can I support employees with family members, including a teenager at risk of suicide? We do all the usual time off, welfare meetings, etc. But is there any way I can go to signpost or escalate medical support for them as a HR manager?
Yeah, I mean, there is lots of support out there, and signposting is extremely important. Again, at Talk Club, I take the sessions. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counsellor. I'll make that clear at every meeting. And again, I think a lot goes back to this just listening. The reason a lot of people come to Talk Club is because we aren't therapists, we aren't counsellors, we're not family, we're not closely connected necessarily to the issues that they're facing. And it is that sort of almost sense of detachment that attracts them to Talk Club and makes them feel safe enough to open up. It's I think as well, not being judgmental, allowing the flexibility for people to take the time to care for their children. Again, I'm seeing now as a father, I've got another son and a daughter who, without going into too much detail, are suffering as a result of losing their brother. And as a parent, I would plead and encourage employers to be patient and compassionate with parents too, and everybody knows, anybody who's got children, and maybe especially teenage children, you know, if they're going through something profound like this, it has an impact on the entire family. I think there's a statistic out there about the amount of people who are affected by a suicide, and it's something, when you take everyone into account, friends, neighbours, schoolmates, colleagues, whatever, it's something like 135, you know, I can't exactly remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but it's something like 135 people. So it's not just those who are suffering who need help and support, it's those around them. And I think a little bit of compassion goes a long way.
It definitely does, Mike. I know from my own personal experiences it goes a long way, and I think trust is everything, and having a manager who is willing to let you be who you need to be, and is, you know, always responsive to any request for help or assistance. Just I'll take our kind of final question. It's good. I like this actually, because it sort of speaks to our change initiative, and it goes back to the media discussion we were just having. But Lucy's suggesting, could charities come together to put pressure on television channels to have adverts, to get one mental health advert in each commercial break, and potentially perhaps around some of these reality television programs? Be interested to get your thoughts on that, Mike.
Absolutely. You know, why not? There are so many ideas out there, all of them, you know, great ideas, and things that can actually be quite easily done. It's really comforting to see some of the media organisations running their own campaign. I think, is it ITV Let's Talk, and you know, campaigns like that are fantastic. And I think the media is slowly changing, it's slowly learning. There will always be bad examples, just like there is in every walk of life, but I think, you know, this thing about again, you know, changing the language, but any means at your disposal, I think, you know. And again, if we just keep reminding ourselves of the amount of money that we spend in this country, not just in the NHS, but on ourselves in terms of physical health and gym membership and all the rest of it. And as Tyson Fury knows well, there is no health without mental health. You can be the fittest person on the planet physically, but what's the point if you know, you're not sort of mentally well? So yeah, I think that's again another sort of brilliant idea, and you know, one that I will certainly carry forward when I speak to the media, which, you know, we will be doing over the months leading up to the Baton of Hope campaign and throughout the tour itself.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you everyone for your questions and comments. There's been so many comments in the webinar chat, which are absolutely fantastic, and really grateful to those. If we haven't been able to answer one of your questions, or you'd just like to follow up, please do that post webinar. I just want to close by actually saying a few thank yous. First and foremost, this is not the final whistle. This is an ongoing conversation, and we're very happy to come back and do future webinars. Massive thanks to Mike. He's been clearly our man of the match today, and provided some tremendous insight across the board. And I'm really grateful to Mike for doing, as he always does, speaking so openly, candidly, but also so brilliantly about these issues. So big thanks, Mike, for your time and for your input. There are some unsung heroes who must be thanked, and they are in the background, but this is a team sport to do this kind of webinar. It takes organisation, it takes planning. I'd like to thank Lisa Lloyd for her expertise today, Sally Hansen, who has been pivotal in getting this webinar together, Sarah Irvin from the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, and one of the biggest unsung heroes always is Mr. David Sabb. He's always in the background, very modest, but absolutely instrumental to getting these webinars together and the wider work that is being done in the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. 4 quick things from me. Listening, absolutely paramount. Please take that away. Listening goes a long way. You've heard from Mike just how important that is. Vulnerability is strength. You've heard of so many examples there, and it actually is the right way to go, and we need to encourage one another to be vulnerable when we're suffering and when we're not feeling so well, because that's an ultimate way to have hope and to reach a solution. Mike's comment about there are far more than you would ever believe, I think is really, really critical. You know, this is an elephant in the room. It can affect anyone at any time. And so being aware, being educated, knowing where to signpost, knowing what you can do can go an awfully long way. And I would encourage everyone to do that. And my closing sentiment, which I believe in most strongly, and I think it's most apposite, not least given what Mike has said today, to quote Ross himself, please keep fighting for mental health. Join the fight with us on the Baton of Hope. It is a message of hope. It's a message of brightness. And together we will always win. Thank you very much indeed.